give a little bit more in terms of the background that brought you to the point into the work that you're doing again here. And I think in that, taking a little bit of time to introduce yourself and to ensure that we really highlight kind of your background, which is so exciting.
I'm so happy that you think so, because every day I wake up and I'm mystified about that. So I'm kidding. Karen, it is so wonderful and such a pleasure to be here with you this morning. I'm so sorry that I had some technical difficulties on my side, but it is truly an honor to be here with you and everybody at FIT. It's such an incredible institution full of brilliant minds, and I'm just really honored. So thank you so much. So where do I begin? I guess I'll go way back to kind of show the kind of transition process of what I was doing before to what I'm doing now, and how to sip water too. So way back, when I was in fledgling in New York City, I was working in hospitality, and I was working in nightlife. I was working in hotels. I owned a restaurant. I was a creative director of a couple of hotels. And I was really working at the intersection of hospitality and fashion in many cases, and also experiential marketing. So what I was doing was basically selling fast fashion, selling fashion at an alarming rate, so to speak. And to give that some context, really what I was doing was producing events and producing big, campaigns to promote the sale of lots of stuff, in a nutshell. And then I ended up having an existential crisis. I know we've talked about this before. When I started to really understand what I was doing, when the veil of the beautiful veil of the fashion industry was pulled back, and I started to really understand about the atrocities that it encompasses with people and planet. And what I mean by that is I never before really understood about supply chains. I never really understood before about how products are made and where things come from, until I actually really kind of took on and understood what happened when I saw the Rana Plaza incident happen. And when I saw that incident, it really stopped me dead in my tracks. And I thought, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? I feel like I'm a small piece in this puzzle, but this piece that I'm actually, owning has a big impact, because what I'm doing is I'm telling people that they need to buy this product. They need to continue to be super consumers. They need to contribute to this take, make, waste economy. My heart actually goes faster just thinking about it. So when I had that existential crisis, when I had that moment, I realized that I had to stop, and I realized that I had to shift this mindset. I had no idea how, and I had no idea what I was going to be doing, until I was invited as a journalist to participate in Copenhagen Fashion Week. Very early days when sustainability in the fashion industry was still not really talked about too much. So I was invited as a journalist to Copenhagen Fashion Week, which was really so cool, because it was there that I actually saw pathway to the future. And
well, but I love that you're talking about these pathways and these intersectional moments, and how really understanding the supply chain and how that connects to the design process, and then also both the creation of an item, and then it moving on to the consumer component within that. And it's something now that we're thinking a lot about, and we're thinking a lot about these things in terms of the pillars of sustainability. We're thinking about them in context to the idea of circularity, life cycle as it connects to circularity, but also how it impacts the environment. And so I love that it kind of gave you that visionary moment to say, wait a second, I can do it a little differently. I can offer a different option.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
When you did that, did you feel like others were on board at that moment, or did you feel like it was a little bit early in that space?
It was very early, and to be honest, well, when I was invited to Copenhagen for Copenhagen Fashion Week and I met Ava Cruz, and the Danish Fashion Initiative, the Danish Fashion Institute, it was like finding this little pocket of people who were really passionate about making these changes. And again, to be quite honest, I had no idea, no clue what a supply chain even was, what a value chain even was. I had no idea the amount of people that it took to produce one t-shirt. I had no idea that, you know, all of these things came into play when actually creating a garment. I just thought, you know, I knew it was made somewhere, but I wasn't really conscious of that. And so what was really amazing about it is actually finding this group of people who are really passionate about every single step in this process, from seed to sales floor, so to speak, and then beyond. And what was really interesting about that at that time is, like, again, even the idea of circularity in the fashion industry was still such a new idea. You know, we had circularity in different parts of industries, but it wasn't something in different industries, but it wasn't something that was so talked about in the fashion industry, because I think everybody was saying, how do we even do this? How do we even address this? So it was really fascinating and inspiring. And it was inspiring because, again, like I said, this collection of people came together who were all really passionate about making change in some way, and learning together and collaborating together and creating cool programs together, and doing stuff and really getting involved. And it felt like it felt kind of grassroots, so to speak, because I guess when you know, to kind of give you like a little visual, when you're looking at the fashion industry, it's this massive, you know, gazillion trillion dollar market space, and it's really controlled by a few key players. And you kind of think to yourself, how are we going to make a difference? How does one person make an impact? And that's really daunting and kind of scary in a way, because you think, like, it's like a salmon swimming upstream of, you know, a million salmons. Like, am I even going the right direction? Am I doing this the right way? But when you connect with people like yourself, like the wonderful people at FIT, like all of the people that are speaking at this incredible event, when you connect with those like minds, the collaboration piece births new ideas. And what's really interesting about that too is, like, you know, kind of taking a little bit of a step back. What's really interesting is, you know, I'm a bit of a perfectionist, or I'm kind of an OCD with perfection when it comes to creating projects that I'm putting out in the world and that I want people to engage in. But what's really interesting about that is, actually I've taken a big step back and just understood that just trying and just pushing and just creating something, even if it doesn't have that success that I was hoping for, as long as that we're trying and collaborating, something good comes from that process. And maybe we learn something new, or maybe something else is invented, or maybe something else is born from that. So it's been really fascinating, because, like, through a million failures, I found a success. And what I really love, what gets me up out of bed every day, I really love that success. So, yeah.
Well, I actually love that, you know, as a teacher and as a scientist, we often learn the most from things that don't work out as we expect. So I love this idea that you are becoming aware of the fact that everything we try and how we push, it's not all going to feel like it has an immediate impact, or that it was the most successful component on the first try out, but that trying is in fact important, and that we often learn how to create a set of different pathways forward there. I also think it's really interesting if we step back a little bit in your phrase. Early on in fashion, I think we focus very much on the visual aspects of it, how it appears, how it looks, what the words are a little bit lost for me on that, but we were focused more so on the visual aspects of it versus how it was produced, how it was actually made. So I think your discussion and talking about this desire to understand the supply chain, understand really where we started, almost from the farming or the fiber creation component to the weaving process and to everything that happens along the way. I think that's a real shift in how we're considering this, I think, globally. And I think in recent times, there's been a lot of openness to having these conversations and realizing that doing it differently or change is not a bad thing. And I think a lot of what we've showcased here this week are people who are pushing the boundaries of change and really stepping out and saying, we've not done it this way before, but let's see what we can do about it. Can we offer a different option?
Yeah, I have to agree. It is so exciting. And now more than ever, I'm starting to see that with the consultancy that we launched through Global Fashion Exchange, we're starting to see people coming to us all the time asking about that, asking, how do we do this better? How do we create a solution? What steps do we take forward? 5 years ago, 3 years ago, pre-COVID, for instance, like those seemed a little bit few and far between. So I'm really happy to see that. And then to relate that a little bit back to my story with Global Fashion Exchange, that aha moment that I had was around this idea of doing something new and different. So I saw a clothing swap for the first time. And that's really kind of how it all started, because I was like looking for what I needed to do, or what I could do, because I just knew that everything back there wasn't serving me and wasn't going to be serving the fashion industry, wasn't serving what I wanted. It just wasn't working, So I stumbled into this clothing swap in the middle of the Copenhagen City Hall Square, and it just was very basic, and it said something across a banner across the top. It said Fashion Exchange, and I just remember that feeling of pandemonium, and I remember that feeling of like, oh my God, seeing people in community coming together and people exchanging and community being created and all the joy around exchanging and this whole new system. This new system to me anyways, it's not a new system, but this new system to me of sharing and not having to spend money on actually participating in the fashion industry. And remember, or let me just refresh you with my story. I was that person that was at those sample sales, like getting, front 6 a.m, showing up at Saint Laurent, elbowing people so I could get that Mubasa bag, or, I was that person, and so finding and experiencing that same joy without, this at the clothing swaps, where people were coming together and creating community, and then the stories that were attached to all of that joy and excitement around their clothing. For instance, I would pick up this item of clothing and I would say, oh my gosh, that's Karen's, or you would come and say, oh, that was mine, or this is so-and-so's. And so what would end up happening is community would start to be created. And then that community was kind of rooted in, like I said, a new way of thinking, and rooted in activism, which then kind of was the beginning of my new frontier, my new pathway, which was exciting, because then what I did is I took an assessment of everything that I was doing in my previous business. And I thought, what are the tools that I can take from this and apply to this new area over here? And I have to say, it wasn't easy, but what's great is that I did have those tools, right? So what I really did was just took a look at how this was going to all roll out. And to your point, which is so important, is that fashion in and of itself is a very visual language. It is a visual language, the fashion industry. And so understanding the difficulties of how are we going to communicate sustainability, how are we going to communicate that we need to participate in something that's better, in a system that's better. First of all, creating a new system, but then we have to, dangle that carrot in front of people, just like the carrot was dangled in front of me at those sample sales. You know what I mean?
Well,
so it was, sorry?
Yeah, no, I do. I understand what you're saying. And you're also starting to talk about this idea of having there be stories around our garments and things that we are starting to see in other spaces within the fashion industries, because you're now seeing new garments come with very, very explicit hang tags that talk about how that garment was created. I did a conversation earlier in this program with Mimi Prober, and she talked about the importance of the hang tags on her one-of-a-kind garments and having that tell an entire story. And we're now seeing that from businesses. And I'm sitting here thinking and listening to you talk about this and thinking, wow, how cool would it be if, I put my garment into the fashion exchange, but it came with a tag of the experience I had with it. Did I wear it to some special event? Did it have some sentimental reason? How did it make me smile, for lack of a better word? Or how do I hope it makes somebody else smile in that space. It's about giving a second life or a continued story to especially items. It seems like in this focus for fashion exchange, you know, there's obviously clothes that we talk about that are very practical, that are like the workhorses in our closets, but then there are also, especially in fashion, these beautiful garments that are loosely created for a one-of-a-kind event. I mean, I'm still very proud that I've worn my wedding dress like 3 times, but that's a whole different story. That was a one-of-a-kind item, right?
Mm-hmm. You're not just gonna throw it on, you know, to go on a Saturday to go get coffee or whatever, you know. But I mean, you could, but I get that, yeah. And it's interesting too, because I think what I love about that now, what you said, is the stories and the connections to things, and I think that's actually a really important part of the process of you know of why we need to care, why we should care, and how to care, and that was one of the once we started doing global fashion exchange, you know, all over the world. That was one of the things that we really started to understand, was that there's all these stories that go along with these, and how do we connect people through these stories. So before we started to really kind of venture into doing many types of collaborations with digital companies, we did this really cool project in Los Angeles at an event called Remode, where we worked with our swap partners there, Swap Society and Fashion Revolution, and we worked with this incredible poet named Wilson Rima, who actually wrote beautiful poems that we put in the pockets of the clothing. So when people found the clothing, they would look in the pocket, and they would pull out a poem by Wilson that was talking about where the clothing came from. So it actually gave a personality, and it gave a feeling to this moment. And the reaction that we had from, you know, everybody that came to that was so positive, because they pulled the poem out and they read it, and it made them feel, there was like a feel appeal that ended up happening, and they connected with the garment, and they wanted to know more about that journey. So when that happened, I knew that we were onto something, and it was like kind of like I said before, we were starting to really get into working with, you know, digital swapping companies that are out there. And then when we started to do that, I was working with a company called Lablaco, and we started to create that actual feeling through that process. And it was essentially taking all of these ideas and putting them into a digital journey. So basically, what would end up happening is we would put the clothing onto the system, which was blockchain, and then it would go back, we would track it back to the originator's closet. But then the idea there was actually to take it back even further, and connecting all these ideas into a swap, where we could connect the average person like me when we would go into either a swap or even a store and say, Karen owned this before, then it was Patrick, then it was at Gap, and before Gap, it was at this factory, it was made by these people in this place, this is the seed that grew the cotton. So then what we were really trying to do with that, which is really interesting, and how it grew. I'm not sure if I'm talking off topic, but what was quite interesting about that was that it made the whole context of what's happening in the fashion industry, from creation to reuse, understandable and tangible in a really interesting and easy way. And I can't tell you how, when we started, I can't explain the feeling enough about that joy when people would experience this for the first time, when they would actually see the chain of who owned it before them and where it came from, and then who made it and how it came to be. And it was like this instant click, almost like a piece that they've been missing, that digital hang tag, that piece that they've been missing for a really long time.
I was going to say, I'm sitting here feeling like, you know, we talked earlier today a little bit about, you know, the work that Mimi Prober does with her kind of one-of-a-kind hang tags with these stories on them, and you're seeing that in other spaces as well. And these stories that you're talking about here, it's almost like I see we haven't talked in this, especially in this past bit, we haven't really focused this much on our conversation about technology and how it can really work in concert with these principles and pillars of sustainability and these real efforts to change the supply chain. But it seems like a digital hang tag where it can continually added, that it's not a static hang tag. It's actually not a physical item at all. It's, a little tiny, for lack of a better word, bar QR code that's on a tag within a garment. And if that garment is in that space, it almost is like it could be registered. And then if you, Patrick, have it, that's great. Then if I have it, I can add my portion of the story to it. And then it moves on. And so even if I'm not with it, I've been able to offer that little bit of a story or that moment in time for it to tell that story. Maybe we just came up with the best idea for the future of hang tags.
Yeah, of course. I think so. I mean, I think that people, it's interesting because I think people really love the information. When you talk to somebody about their food, for instance, most people want to know if their food comes from a healthy place. Is it organic? Is this good for me? I'm putting in my body. Most people really like to know that. So it's interesting because the fashion industry doesn't or hasn't historically provided that context for people. And maybe that's because they wanted to protect their resources for how they were creating these garments. But now we're starting to see this shift into sharing economy. And that means a huge shift into sharing resources, sharing tools, sharing so many different things, as opposed to before where it was kind of this closed economy of this is ours, that's yours, we're in competition, we can't reveal our sources. And now we're starting to see a whole different type of business model from that. And so I think it's
feeling much more collaborative in this moment. I think we're going to have discussions later today, an upcoming program that really focus on that collaboration component, and the fact that bringing people together from a variety of different sectors really provides us a lot of power moving forward. I also agree that in the last 2 years, there's been a much greater amount of openness to discussions of changing the supply chain, changing really all aspects of a product's life cycle, from creation at the very, very basic level to its end of life component, and how we see that and understand that within that space. I think in an effort to make sure that we're mindful of time here and we give our audience the opportunity also to ask some questions at the end, I'm going to try to bring us back just a little bit. And, we've talked a lot about your journey, your work as from really the very beginning, where you started with this understanding of needing to have hospitality, and then, as a journalist, communicating and telling a story and the importance of that story and how you utilize that, as to a designer, somebody who actually created their own brand, has their own label within that space. And then, now you've really kind of refocused all of these experiences, which are unique in and of themselves, into a point where you're kind of putting them all together. It's not one of these points. I mean, it's really, you're utilizing all of those skills to address the pillars of sustainability, but all these experiences, and that's kind of led you to the creation of the Global Fashion Exchange. I want to make sure we share exactly what the Global Fashion Exchange is. And we've talked about it. We've talked about it as a clothing swap. We've kind of used it out there, but I want to make sure that people in our audience really know what the Global Fashion Exchange is, and also where, if they want to learn more about it, they can. I'm pretty sure you populated it in the chat as you were coming on, the beautiful kind of lookbook to show the beauty of some of these garments. But maybe you could talk a little bit about that right now.
Yeah, so that you mean, of course. Thank you. I'm so excited. So what I populated in the chat is the brand that I worked in partnership with this incredible organization called Fashion for Freedom. So to kind of bring this into context, it was like so Fashion for Freedom is an incredible organization that works with artisans and indigenous communities in Vietnam to really create a sustainable supply chain for the fashion industry. So when I met Lan Bi Wen, it was an amazing meeting of the minds, because she had this incredible process that was happening, which was about investing into these indigenous and artisan communities who were really losing their shirts, so to speak, because of how the industry was affecting them in Vietnam, and they were losing the ability to create sustainable living for themselves and their families and their communities with their craft. So what was ended up happening was their craft and this ancient language, through weaving and other different techniques, was going away. So what was happening is that culture was being lost. And when culture is lost, it's very difficult to get back, almost impossible, so to speak. So why it's really important to preserve culture and to preserve techniques is because then we can have a history. Number one, we can have a history, and that people can learn from that forever. But number two, in this particular case, it was really interesting because what Landy's doing with Fashion for Freedom is about preserving cultures and communities and allowing them to continue what they've been doing for a very, very long time, as opposed to having to now work in a factory that gets dropped into their community, or work in a place that really has nothing to do with, you know, what they have been doing in their community, whether it's farming or weaving or ceramics or carving for many, many, many years. So when I got linked to Landy, it was incredible because what I saw was my ability to work with Landy was that kind of missing link with Fashion for Freedom, which was about the storytelling and the communication and how do we link this to a global market. And Landy was doing a really good job of that on her own. But that's when we came together and created this really cool brand called Mr. Duffy. And Mr. Duffy really was basically about exactly that, was about working with Landy and these different techniques, as you can see here in the PDF that I sent. Of course, we didn't have a budget for a model, so I had to be the model. And you can see at the top, there's me. But what we ended up doing, and Landy was so smart, was basically looking at the different types of resources to make this a circular collection that was made from waste. So you can see the artisan here on the right side on a backstrap loom. She's a part of the A Lui tribe in northern Vietnam, and those threads are actually recycled threads. So those threads were recovered from Coats, which is a thread company. I'm sure you all know this as designers, which also has a wastage issue. So Landy worked to recover, to create a relationship with Coats to bring these threads to these indigenous artisan communities, which was really smart, because what that did is it reduced the amount of time that it took to create the thread or create the material. It allowed for new and interesting fabrics to be made with all these bright and interesting and vibrant colors. And it solved a problem, it solved an issue. So Mr. Duffy was created in a way to basically help shape and create a brand which showed all of these steps in the process in a visually appealing mass market way, where people will look at what I'm wearing. For instance, the jacket with the beautiful embroidery, which is made from thread waste and dead stock. Jacket was made from dead stock velvet, to the incredible, if you scroll down a little bit, you can see I'm wearing a beautiful purple linen jacket, which is made from linen, which is dyed with natural dyes. You can see here on the right side, I'm standing with Landy, and we're working with an artisan to create a platform shoe, which is made from lotus wood, which has been recovered from architectural waste, as architectural waste. And then you can also see there is a kind of a patchwork on the middle image. There's a patchwork piece of art that's going on the back of a piece of clothing that's also made from scraps. So anyways, the point of Mr. Duffy was to do many different things, was to connect people like us to this community, to get them to understand not only the story about where something came from, who's making it, but also the cultural importance of why we need to preserve this culture and many cultures, indigenous and artisan cultures. number one. Number two, to get them to understand the process. And so I didn't actually have a picture of the hang tag, but what was so interesting that you pointed out before was we actually created a hang tag, which was slightly controversial when we first put it out there, because the hang tag for Mr. Duffy had every single step of, it was transparent, fully transparent, every single step and every single part of the process to how this jacket was made. So we really leaned on Lanby to share how much it cost to actually pay the artisan. What does it cost for the, for instance, the shipping of the threads, the producing of the material, all of those things were laid out very clearly on this hang tag, and people could then see this jacket costs $642, and here's why. And when people saw that, it blew their mind, because they didn't, when you see a hang tag wherever a store where you're walking into, whether it's $9.99 or $999 or even $9,000 at a super major luxury brand, people don't really typically understand how we arrived at that number until now. So people are now starting to understand that because of this transparency, this new system that we designed, that people could then understand that, oh wow, at this $9,000 luxury store, it might, not that these luxury stores have these hang tags on them, but if they did, they would then see that 7,000 of that goes to marketing or business development, or the upkeep on the Champs-Elysees, or whatever that is. So the idea was to help create this way to kind of have people really understand what's into the making of these garments, but then also the costs and why some things are more expensive than others. And it's really interesting because when people then start to really understand that, it then even again deeply connects them to the clothing that they're wearing. There was another really interesting component to this, which I don't have a visual of, but part of this, which was also super interesting with this brand, which was super conceptual, was about linking in a visual supply chain, visual to the actual supply chain. So we worked with this brilliant man in this brilliant company called SourceMap, Leah Bonani, and what we did was we put every part of the supply chain, steps on the supply chain, into a visual map, that's what SourceMap does. So SourceMap creates this incredible visualization of a supply chain. So when you go on SourceMap now, you can actually see supply chains for companies like Reese's Chocolate, Timberland, Vans. I think Adidas is now on there. They have thousands and thousands of supply chain maps. So then when you look at the chain map, you see, you really start to think, oh my gosh, my shirt was grown here, sewn here, the buttons were assembled here, the zipper was put on here, and you start to see the impact of this garment, and you start to ask those questions like, why is this happening this way? So the whole thing is about redesigning the system, and with Mr. Duffy, what we tried to do was make it as simple as possible. And so it's from, the indigenous communities we tried to do a direct to sales model, which was design on demand. And so what was really interesting about that was we created a whole kind of suite of products which were templates. So the idea behind this, again, it was super conceptual. The idea behind this is, if you liked this kimono style jacket that you're seeing Patrick wear, you can order your own in your own size. So again, another layer to how we're reducing waste, how we're reducing the idea of overages. We're not producing too many things that might end up in landfill. So it was all these things kind of connected into one. It was really exciting.
It seems like this idea also of many custom pieces, if for no other reason than you're using, small lots or small bolts of fabric. So, we can't make 2 million pairs of garment X, that you are really making it, and they'll all be unique, even if they're all using the same basic template or the same design template, that they're all unique because the resource you're using for them, is all, for example, a button. It's not necessarily the same button, depending on how they were sourced. So I think you're really speaking to that importance of thinking of the sources, and then also realizing or talking specifically about the importance of mindfulness in terms of what and how you create. So you're creating because there is a need or a desire for a specific thing. We're not creating in the hopes that we can hang it in the store window and then, you know, that I'll want to go buy it. So I think this will be I think this is a pivotal concept, and I think there'll be people who really miss a more traditional retail experience and still wish for that. And then there are others who they've not ever thought of clothing or clothing shopping in that way, so they do want that unique piece within that. I know later today as well, we'll talk to the team from Fab Scrap in New York, and which is now expanded, but they're really utilizing much of that same kind of model, which is providing bolts and pieces of fabric to places that where they would not have been useful, you know, from a mass production standpoint, but they're very useful to a designer doing one-of-a-kind work, or a student, or somebody trying out something new in terms of that concept. So I think that's really interesting. So much of this work, both with the Global Fashion Exchange and your own brand here, really does speak to the importance of embedding the Sustainable Development Goals within the fashion industries and within the supply chain, and utilizing that as a vehicle for impact. Do you want to speak a touch to that? And then I want to make sure in our last few minutes we give our audience a bit of time for questions. So before we do that, I'm going to remind everybody the chat is open for questions. I'm going to monitor that, and then I'll feed those to Patrick. I saw a lot of hands up early on. So please type your questions in the chat, and I will, we can answer those in our last little bit here, and then we'll move on from there.
Perfect. Oh my gosh, thank you so much. Hope I wasn't rambling. I just love talking about it though. So, you know, Global Fashion Exchange in and of itself is rooted in the idea of clothing swaps and sharing and extending the life of our clothing. And so what Global Fashion Exchange is rooted in that. And then we build all these cool programs, products, projects. We're doing something very soon in New York City. So I hope you guys can all participate in Hudson Yards, which is all around this idea, which is rooted also in the Sustainable Development Goals. So all of the Sustainable Development Goals are A, super important, and B, relevant. And what's really interesting is that they all kind of fit together. So what I love about the SDGs, for someone like me, it makes it easy to understand what we want to be working towards. But what's so cool about it is that if you're working towards, for instance, 12, 13, and 14, which are the ones that I really resonate with me, which is about 12 is responsible consumption, 13 is climate action, and 14 is life below water, is everything that we do in the fashion industry, but also in Global Fashion Exchange, even when kind of focusing on these three, also talks about poverty or gender equality, or you know, all of them. So it's really great. So if you choose one, you kind of are already subscribing to all of them, which is awesome. And so with responsible production and consumption, that's where you can see from my examples of Mr. Duffy and then also the clothing swaps. These are the things that we're trying to really work towards when we do our own projects, when we do our clothing swaps. For instance, you know, when you do a clothing swap, it is probably the most responsible and least impactful way to consume. I hate that word. So I like to say participate in the fashion industry, because what you're not relying on anything new. You are not relying on you know, creating a product that might be detrimental to people or planet. You're simply taking something and extending the life of it, which has lots of positive benefits. And so for me, that's my favorite. It's kind of like the the holy grail, if we can say that, the ultimate of sustainability actions. And so from there, of course, that has positive knock-on effects to, for instance, the climate, and also life below water, which is the oceans are something that I'm also super passionate about, because I think something that's not necessarily talked about too much is how the fashion industry affects not just the earth that we walk on and that we are living and existing on, but the planet underneath the water, and how all of that beautiful unknowingness is affected, as an example, with the microplastic that comes from
We could
Right.
talk about these items of impact for many
A long
points,
time.
many
Yeah.
future conversations. The hydrosphere has a great impact. I have a few questions from our audience that I want to make sure to share with you. The biggest question, which we've actually had a couple times, which are everybody is really lusting after seeing some of the visual examples from the Mr. Duffy garment brand and also from the Global Fashion Exchange. And if you're good with that, I would love that. What we can do is connect those links directly under the session description. After this session wraps, we can have those available back on the website. If you're good with that, can you share those back out with Lady and I?
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely. So we'll have those connected. So for those of you who want to view those garments and to see these examples from this beautiful work, we'll get those up so you have direct links off of our website to access those visuals that he put up in the chat. And then one of our other questions is actually regarding the network for dead stock recovery other than FAP scrap. So are you finding other ways for this? Could you talk a little bit to that point?
Yes, yes. There's one of the biggest and bestest out there is my dear friend Stephanie Benedetto from a company called Queen of Raw. You probably know her. I think she's maybe even spoken a few times at FIT. But what she's done is really incredible. And actually, we've connected her to the indigenous communities as well, which is super fascinating. But she has an incredible online space where designers like yourselves, who are producing in small quantities or big, can go and basically source fabrics and get them in small quantities. You can even do mood boards online, and there's millions and millions and millions of tons that she has access to because of how she's connected to these storage facilities and people that are producing fabric all over the world. So I would definitely check out Queen of Raw. Tell her that I sent you. I love her. She's doing an amazing, amazing job, and she's also doing a lot of education. So when you're looking and you're going through Queen of Raw, you're not only exploring the beautiful fabrics that she has access to or that she's putting on there, but you're learning about the facts that it takes to, make the fabrics, where they come from, how much energy is used, how much water is used. So she's doing a really incredible job, and it's all on blockchain. So you're learning a lot while you're going through that process as well. So if there's one big one that I can suggest.
So Patrick, a couple other questions. One is, we would love to have you put the link directly to the Queen of Raw site up here in the chat. This is the chat with everybody, so then everybody can see that. And while you're typing that in, I'm actually going to get to one more question here, which is, why did you choose the specific Vietnamese community as the indigenous people whom you wanted to work with? Could you speak to how you made that choice or connection to work with them?
Yeah, well, it kind of came to me. And so I was doing a lot of work with the United Nations and doing a lot of work in and around this space, like doing work with, for instance, Nest and Rebecca Van Bergen, and understanding what she's doing. So I was really starting to kind of dabble into the artisan and indigenous community space. And then I met Landy, and then became impassioned with working with her and working in that space. And she really did a lot to educate me and open my eyes because of that collaboration. And I owe so much to her, and owe so much to that experience of creating that brand, Mr. Duffy, because she really opened again my eyes to this new way of creating and the importance of all of that, which has now led me to be super engaged with artisan communities all over the world. In fact, I'm the global ambassador for a big artisan summit that's happening soon with my dear friend Vandana Tiwari, and really championing that because I feel so strongly that we need to preserve these cultures, not just in Vietnam, but everywhere, even in New York City. we need to really preserve and protect those techniques before they go away forever. So it kind of chose me. I was like a bit swept off my feet, but
well, excellent. Well, thank you so much. I think this was a really exciting conversation. So a couple people have struggled to find get in the right spot for the chat versus the Q&A. It's a different option. So for people who are looking for the links in the chat, if you go ahead and if you click the participant component where you see the panelists and the attendees. You see the chat comes up in that space. That should help you find that there. Everybody's using a slightly different interface, so it's hard for me to know. But for those of you with concerns that you haven't seen the links we've shared or the visuals, we'll make sure to put that information up on the website as follow-up for this. Now, it's really been such a pleasure to chat with you. I know we could chat and share these visuals all day long. I really love to have you come to campus when that becomes an opportunity and share these in a really big screen with everybody to see and have you speak to the design process, the supply chain, and the collaborative work that you're doing. So Patrick, so exciting to talk to you as always. I hope people will in fact come and work beyond this within the Global Fashion Exchange. I believe you'll be at Hudson Yards during Earth Week. Am I correct?
Yeah. May I share the link in the chat? Is that okay?
Of course you may. Please do.
And that's how you can find us too. And first of all, it would be such a huge honor to come be with you at FIT and teach, but also learn. And I would love to do that, whether we're talking about interesting ideas to create clothing collections, connecting with Indigenous and artisan communities, or swapping. So I really, really, really would love that.
And I think all of these are great points. And I think the really important thing is that for all of us, we are going to continue to learn and be scholars and stewards of our environment. So really, I thank you. I thank everybody who was able to come and join us. We apologize for the technical difficulty in the beginning. It seemed like everybody had a little bit of a rough start, me included on that. But again, I thank you all, and I hope you'll join us the rest of today. We have an exciting lineup of programming coming up, and we'll work beyond that. Patrick's last name is Duffy.
That's me. And that's
right.
it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and everybody have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure. I really appreciate it. I want to stay on forever.
I know, I know.
Gotta go, Patrick. Gotta go. Bye.
We all have to go. We all have the next sessions of the conference. But thank you so much, everybody. Such a lively conversation as always. And yes, we can always continue it, but we'll provide more opportunities for that. And we hope everybody else can come back and join us as well for some of these future opportunities. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.